The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as 10-year-old Prince George walked alongside his father, Prince William. The young prince's school shoes clicked against the ancient stone pathways, creating a rhythm that had become familiar to the royal guards stationed throughout the grounds. Guard Sergeant James Morrison had been protecting the royal family for 12 years. At 42, he had seen many changes within the palace walls, but nothing had prepared him for the subtle ways the youngest generation of royals would touch his heart. Morrison stood at attention near the East Wing entrance, his red uniform immaculate, his expression stern and professional as always. Prince George had always been curious about the guards. Unlike his younger siblings, Charlotte and Louis, who would often wave enthusiastically or try to make the stoic soldiers smile, George approached them differently. He observed them quietly, studying their movements, their dedication, and their unwavering commitment to duty. On this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. As Prince George passed Morrison's post, he slowed his pace slightly. The guard noticed but maintained his rigid posture, eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. However, Prince George did something unexpected. Instead of walking by as usual, he stopped completely. "Father," George said quietly to Prince William, "may I have a moment?" Prince William, understanding his son's thoughtful nature, nodded and stepped back slightly, giving George space while remaining close enough to supervise. The prince turned toward Morrison and, for the first time in months of passing encounters, made direct eye contact with the guard. Morrison's training told him to maintain his position, but something in the young prince's expression was different. There was a maturity there that seemed beyond his years, a genuine concern that caught the seasoned guard off balance. "Sergeant Morrison," Prince George said softly, having learned the guard's name from previous conversations he'd overheard between his father and security personnel. "I wanted to ask you something, but I know you can't speak while on duty." The guard's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the prince, a tiny acknowledgement that he was listening despite his professional obligations. George seemed to understand this silent communication perfectly. "I've been watching you stand here every morning for weeks," George continued, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even his father. "I know you can't move or sit down, and I was wondering if your feet hurt." "My feet hurt when I have to stand still for just a few minutes during ceremonies." Morrison felt something shift inside his chest. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever expressed concern for his physical comfort. The question was innocent, childlike, yet it demonstrated an awareness and empathy that moved him deeply. Prince William watched this exchange with growing pride in his son. He had always hoped that George would develop compassion and awareness of others, regardless of their position or role in life. This moment seemed to crystallize those hopes into reality. George reached into his small backpack and pulled out something that made Morrison's professional composure waver for just a split second. It was a simple drawing, clearly made by a child's hand, showing a guard in his red uniform standing proudly beside a castle. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe." "I made this for you," George said, holding out the drawing. "I know you can't take it right now, but maybe when your shift ends, you could have it. I wanted you to know that I notice how hard you work." Morrison's throat tightened. The gesture was so unexpected, so genuine, that it threatened to break through years of professional training. He managed to give the slightest nod, a movement so subtle that only George seemed to catch it. Prince William stepped forward then, understanding the delicate nature of the moment. "Sergeant Morrison, when your shift concludes, please see me in my office. Prince George would very much like to present his gift to you properly." The guard's eyes met Prince William's briefly, and, in that moment, something passed between them. It was understanding, respect, and perhaps a recognition that this young prince was learning lessons about humanity and kindness that would serve him well in his future role. As they continued their walk toward the waiting car that would take George to school, the prince looked back once at Morrison. The guard remained perfectly still, perfectly professional, but George could have sworn he saw the hint of a smile in the man's eyes. Prince William placed his hand on his son's shoulder as they walked. "That was very thoughtful of you, George," he said quietly. "He stands there every day, rain or shine," George replied, adjusting his school bag. "And no one ever says thank you. That doesn't seem right to me." The simplicity of the statement, the pure logic of a child's moral reasoning, struck Prince William powerfully. His son was learning not just to notice the people around him, but to value them, to see their service as worthy of acknowledgement and gratitude. As their car pulled away from the castle, George pressed his face to the window for one last look at Morrison. The guard remained at his post, but something had changed. The drawing in George's backpack would wait until the shift change, but the impact of the gesture had already begun to ripple outward in ways none of them could have anticipated. In the guardhouse, word of the exchange was already beginning to spread. Guards talked to each other during their brief moments between duties, and Morrison's fellow officers had witnessed enough to know that something significant had occurred. They had all noticed Prince George's growing awareness of their presence over the past months, but this morning's interaction represented something new. Guard Captain Rebecca Hayes had been monitoring the situation from a distance, as was her duty when any member of the royal family was moving through the castle grounds. She had served alongside Morrison for 8 years and knew him to be one of the most dedicated and professional soldiers in the entire royal guard. She had also noticed the way his demeanor had subtly shifted over recent weeks, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why until now. The morning's events would prove to be just the beginning of a series of changes that would affect not only Morrison, but the entire culture of service within the royal guard. Prince George's simple act of recognition had planted a seed that would grow in unexpected directions, touching lives and transforming relationships in ways that no one could have predicted. As Morrison continued his watch, standing straight and proud in his red uniform, he carried with him something he had never experienced in his 12 years of service: the knowledge that his dedication had been truly seen and valued by the very person he had sworn to protect. The clock tower chimed 3 times as Sergeant Morrison's replacement arrived for the afternoon shift. Guard Corporal David Chun approached with the precision and punctuality that defined the Royal Guard, but he immediately noticed something different about Morrison's demeanor. The veteran sergeant seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Unusual morning? Chun inquired quietly as they prepared for the shift change, following the careful protocols that ensured the royal family's protection never wavered for even a moment. Morrison's response was a subtle nod toward the east wing. Prince George stopped to speak with me today. Actually stopped and spoke to me. Chin's eyebrows rose slightly. In his 6 years of service, he had grown accustomed to the royal children's friendly waves and occasional smiles. But direct conversation was rare and always memorable. What did he say? He was concerned about whether my feet hurt from standing all day, Morrison replied, his voice carrying a note of amazement that he couldn't quite suppress. And he made me a drawing. As Morrison made his way toward Prince William's office as requested, word of the morning's events continued to spread throughout the Royal Guard network. These men and women, trained in discretion and professionalism, found themselves genuinely moved by the young prince's gesture. It wasn't just the act itself, but what it represented about the kind of person George was becoming. In his office, Prince William had been reflecting on his son's behavior throughout the morning. He had always known that George was observant and thoughtful, but today's interaction with Morrison revealed a depth of empathy and social awareness that both impressed and concerned him. Impressed because it showed George developing into a compassionate leader, concerned because it demonstrated that his son was already thinking deeply about the responsibilities and relationships that would define his future role. When Morrison knocked on the office door, Prince William felt a mixture of pride and curiosity. He was eager to see how this interaction would unfold and what it might teach both George and the dedicated soldier who served their family so faithfully. "Come in, Sergeant Morrison," Prince William called, standing as the guard entered. Morrison's posture was impeccable as always, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was as uncertain about this meeting as he was honored by it. "Your Royal Highness," Morrison said, executing a perfect salute. "You asked to see me regarding Prince George's gift." Prince William gestured toward a chair, an informality that would have been unthinkable in earlier generations of royal protocol. "Please sit down. George specifically asked that I arrange this meeting so he could properly present his drawing to you when he returns from school." Morrison sat carefully, clearly uncomfortable with the casual nature of the interaction, but unwilling to refuse a direct request from Prince William. "Sir, I want you to know that Prince George's gesture this morning was completely unexpected and deeply appreciated. In all my years of service, nothing has touched me quite like his thoughtfulness." Prince William nodded, settling into his own chair. George has been watching the guards for months now. He's always been observant, but lately, he's been asking me questions about your duties, your schedules, the challenges of standing at attention for long periods. I think he's been building up to this morning's conversation for quite some time. The revelation surprised Morrison. The idea that the young prince had been thinking about the guard's experiences over an extended period suggested a level of consideration that went far beyond a momentary impulse of kindness. "If I may ask, sir," Morrison said carefully, "how should I respond when Prince George presents the drawing? I want to honor his gesture appropriately while maintaining proper protocol." Prince William smiled at the question. It perfectly encapsulated the delicate balance that everyone around the royal family had to maintain between personal relationships and professional boundaries. "Morrison, I think today calls for setting aside some of the more formal protocols. George's action comes from his heart, and I believe your response should as well." Meanwhile, at Lambert School, Prince George was finding it difficult to concentrate on his afternoon lessons. His mind kept returning to Morrison's subtle nod, the brief moment of eye contact, and the anticipation of properly presenting his drawing after school. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed his distraction during mathematics and gently called his attention back to the lesson. "Prince George, you seem to have something on your mind today," she observed kindly during a break between subjects. George hesitated, then decided to share his thoughts. "I gave a drawing to one of our guards this morning, and I'm going to present it to him properly after school. I wanted him to know that I appreciate what he does for our family." Mrs. Patterson was struck by the maturity of George's reasoning. She had taught many children from privileged backgrounds, but George's developing awareness of others and his sense of gratitude consistently impressed her. "That sounds like a very thoughtful gesture," she said. "What made you decide to make the drawing?" "Well," George said, settling into the kind of earnest explanation that characterized his personality, "I realized that the guards stand there every day, protecting us, and no one really talks to them or thanks them. That seemed wrong to me. My father always says that showing appreciation for people's hard work is important, no matter what their job is." The conversation was overheard by several of George's classmates, who began asking questions about life at the castle and the royal guards. George found himself describing Morrison's daily routine, his dedication, and the way all the guards worked together to keep the royal family safe. As he talked, he realized that his appreciation for their service was growing even deeper. Back at Windsor Castle, the afternoon shift was settling into its routine. Corporal Chun had taken over Morrison's post, but he found himself thinking about the morning's events. He had served alongside Morrison for years and had never seen him quite so moved by an interaction with the royal family. During his brief break, Chun encountered Guard Captain Hayes in the corridor leading to the staff facilities. Hayes had been thinking about Morrison's experience all day, trying to understand what made this particular interaction so significant. "Captain," Chun said respectfully, "I wanted to mention that Sergeant Morrison seemed quite affected by his conversation with Prince George this morning." Hayes nodded. "I observed the interaction from a distance. The prince showed remarkable thoughtfulness for someone his age." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I've been thinking about what this might mean for how we relate to the royal family, particularly the younger generation." The conversation touched on something that had been evolving gradually within the royal guard. As Prince William and Catherine had raised their children with an emphasis on normalcy and consideration for others, the traditional barriers between the royal family and their protection detail had begun to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. "I think Prince George is learning to see us as people, not just uniformed fixtures," Chun observed. "That's both heartening and somewhat challenging for those of us trying to maintain professional distance." Hayes agreed. The balance between personal warmth and professional boundaries was becoming increasingly complex as the royal children grew older and more aware of the people around them. Today's events suggested that this trend would only continue and perhaps accelerate as George matured. As the afternoon wore on, anticipation began building throughout the royal guard for the evening's presentation ceremony. Word had spread discreetly among the staff, and there was a genuine sense of curiosity about how this unprecedented interaction would unfold. Morrison spent his off-duty hours reflecting on the morning's events and preparing mentally for the evening ahead. He had served the royal family with unwavering dedication for over a decade, but he had never expected to be recognized so personally by one of the younger royals. The experience had given him a new perspective on his service and a deeper appreciation for the family he protected. Prince William, meanwhile, was preparing for what he hoped would be a meaningful lesson for his son about leadership, gratitude, and the importance of recognizing the contributions of others. He knew that George's natural empathy and thoughtfulness were valuable qualities that needed to be nurtured and channeled appropriately as he grew toward his future responsibilities. As the school day ended and George prepared to return home to Windsor Castle. Both he and Morrison were thinking about the simple drawing that had already begun to transform their relationship and influence the culture of service within the royal guard in ways neither of them had anticipated. The royal car pulled through the gates of Windsor Castle just as the evening light began to cast a golden glow across the ancient stones. Prince George sat quietly in the back seat, his school bag clutched in his lap, still containing the drawing he had promised to present to Sergeant Morrison. Throughout the day, his excitement about the upcoming ceremony had grown, but so had his nervousness about whether he was doing the right thing. Prince William noticed his son's contemplative mood as they walked from the car toward the castle entrance. "Are you having second thoughts about presenting the drawing to Sergeant Morrison?" he asked gently. George shook his head, then paused. "Not second thoughts exactly, but I keep wondering if I should have made drawings for all the guards. I don't want Sergeant Morrison to feel singled out, and I don't want the others to feel left out." The concern revealed the depth of George's consideration for others and his growing awareness of the complexities of leadership and fairness. Prince William smiled at his son's thoughtfulness while recognizing a teaching moment about decision-making and the impossibility of pleasing everyone simultaneously. "Those are good questions to think about," Prince William replied. "But sometimes recognizing one person's service can inspire appreciation for everyone's contribution. Your gesture towards Sergeant Morrison honors all the guards, not just him." Meanwhile, Sergeant Morrison was preparing for what felt like one of the most important moments of his military career. He had changed into his dress uniform, the one reserved for special ceremonies and official occasions. The irony wasn't lost on him that a simple drawing from a 10-year-old boy felt more significant than some of the official commendations he had received over the years. Guard Captain Hayes had decided to attend the presentation, recognizing its potential importance for morale and the evolving relationship between the royal family and their protection detail. She had served under 3 different monarchs and had witnessed many changes in royal protocol, but nothing quite like this grassroots demonstration of mutual respect and appreciation. As word of the evening's ceremony continued to spread among the castle staff, something unexpected began to happen. Other guards started sharing their own experiences of small kindnesses from the royal children over the years. Corporal Chin mentioned how Princess Charlotte always said, "Good morning," when she passed his post. Another guard recalled Prince Louis attempting to march in step with him during a garden party. These moments, previously regarded as charming but insignificant, suddenly seemed part of a larger pattern of the younger royals developing awareness and appreciation of the people who served them. In the small anteroom where the presentation would take place, Prince William was setting up a more formal atmosphere than he had originally planned. George's earlier concern about fairness had sparked an idea about how to make this moment meaningful not just for Morrison, but for the entire royal guard. "Father," George said as he watched the preparations, "I've been thinking about what you said, about honoring all the guards through recognizing one. Do you think I could say something about that when I give Sergeant Morrison the drawing?" Prince William felt a surge of pride at his son's initiative. "What would you like to say?" George pulled out a small piece of paper from his pocket, covered with his careful handwriting. "I wrote down some thoughts during my last class today. I wanted to make sure I said it right." The paper contained a short speech that demonstrated both George's sincerity and his developing sense of occasion. He had thought carefully about how to acknowledge Morrison's individual service while recognizing the collective dedication of all the guards. The speech was simple, direct, and heartfelt in the way that only a child's honest expression could be. At precisely 6 o'clock, Sergeant Morrison knocked on the door of the anteroom. When he entered, he was surprised to find not only Prince William and Prince George, but also Guard Captain Hayes and, to his amazement, several of his fellow guards who had been quietly invited to witness the ceremony. Prince George stood when Morrison entered, the drawing held carefully in his hands. The young prince's posture was formal but not stiff, suggesting that he understood the significance of the moment while remaining naturally himself. "Sergeant Morrison," George began, referring to his prepared notes, but speaking with genuine warmth, "I wanted to present this drawing to you, but I also wanted to say something to everyone here." Morrison stood at attention, but his expression had softened in a way that would have been unthinkable during his regular duties. The other guards maintained their professional bearing while clearly being moved by the unexpected honor of being included in this moment. "I made this drawing for Sergeant Morrison because I noticed how dedicated he is to protecting our family," George continued, his young voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "But as I thought about it more today, I realize that he represents all of you. Every morning, every afternoon, every evening, you all stand ready to keep us safe. You do this in all kinds of weather, when you're tired, when your feet hurt, when you probably wish you could sit down or talk or move around. The guards exchanged glances, surprised by the 10-year-old's perceptive understanding of their daily experience. Morrison felt his throat tighten as George's words captured exactly the physical and mental challenges of their service that civilians rarely considered. My father has taught me that leadership means noticing the people who serve alongside you and making sure they know their work matters, George went on, looking directly at Morrison. So when I give this drawing to Sergeant Morrison, I'm really giving it to all of you, to thank you for everything you do for our family. The room was completely silent for a moment as George stepped forward and formally presented the drawing to Morrison. The sergeant accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, despite his years of training in maintaining composure under all circumstances. Morrison looked down at the drawing, seeing not just the childish representation of a guard and castle, but the hours of thought and care that had gone into its creation. The words, "Thank you for keeping us safe," seemed to carry the weight of genuine gratitude that transcended the formality of his position. "Prince George," Morrison said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying unmistakable emotion. "On behalf of the entire Royal Guard, I want to thank you for this gift and for your words. In all my years of service, I have never felt more honored or more appreciated. Your thoughtfulness reminds us why our service matters and inspires us to continue giving our best every day." Prince William watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. His son was learning lessons about leadership, gratitude, and human dignity that would serve him throughout his life. More importantly, George was learning these lessons through his own initiative and natural empathy, not through forced instruction or artificial ceremony. Guard Captain Hayes stepped forward then, recognizing the moment as one that deserved official acknowledgement. "Prince George, your gesture today honors not only Sergeant Morrison and the current Royal Guard, but all those who have served your family over the generations. Your awareness and appreciation of our service means more to us than you might realize." As the ceremony concluded, something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between Prince George and the Royal Guard. The drawing itself would be framed and displayed in the guardhouse, where it would remind everyone of the young prince's thoughtfulness. But the deeper impact was in the recognition that their service was truly seen and valued, not just expected and taken for granted. The guards filed out of the anteroom with a new spring in their step, each carrying with them the knowledge that they served a family that was raising the next generation to appreciate and respect their dedication. Morrison remained behind for a moment, still holding the drawing and struggling to process the depth of emotion he felt. "Sergeant Morrison," Prince George said quietly, "I hope I can learn to be as dedicated to my duties as you are to yours." The comment, so sincere and thoughtful, nearly broke through Morrison's professional composure entirely. He managed a formal bow and a heartfelt, "It would be my honor to serve you throughout your life, Your Royal Highness." As evening settled over Windsor Castle, the impact of Prince George's simple gesture continued to ripple through the Royal Guard. The young prince had unknowingly set in motion changes that would affect not only how the guards viewed their service, but how they related to each other and to the royal family they protected. The weeks following Prince George's gesture brought unexpected changes to the atmosphere within Windsor Castle. What had begun as a simple act of appreciation had evolved into something much larger, influencing the daily interactions between the royal family and their staff in ways that surprised everyone involved. Sergeant Morrison found himself approached by colleagues who wanted to hear firsthand about his interaction with Prince George. The drawing now hung in a place of honor in the guardhouse, but its significance extended far beyond its physical presence. It had become a symbol of recognition that transformed how the guards viewed their relationship with the royal family they protected. Guard Corporal Sarah Mitchell, who had been with the Royal Guard for 5 years, noticed the change immediately. "There's something different in how we carry ourselves now," she observed to Morrison during a brief break between shifts. "It's as if Prince George's recognition reminded us that we're not just security fixtures, but valued members of the royal household." Morrison nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The young prince's gesture had awakened something that had been dormant in their service. They had always taken pride in their work, but now there was an additional layer of meaning that came from knowing their dedication was truly seen and appreciated. Prince William had been observing these changes with great interest. As someone who had grown up surrounded by royal protocol, he understood how rare it was for genuine human connection to bridge the formal boundaries that typically defined royal relationships. His son's natural empathy was creating possibilities that had never existed before. During his weekly briefing with Guard Captain Hayes, Prince William addressed the changes he had noticed. "Captain, I've observed improved morale among the Royal Guard since George's presentation ceremony. Has this been your experience as well?" Captain Hayes, always measured in her responses, considered her words carefully. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. There's been a noticeable increase in the Guard's sense of purpose and satisfaction with their service. Prince George's recognition has reminded them that their work has personal meaning, not just professional obligation." The conversation touched on something that both had been thinking about, but neither had explicitly addressed. The traditional distance between royalty and their protection detail was based on security protocols and centuries of established practice. But Prince George's generation was growing up with different expectations about human relationships and mutual respect. "I'd like to explore ways to formalize this recognition without compromising security or professional boundaries," Prince William said. George's gesture was spontaneous and heartfelt, but perhaps there are institutional ways to acknowledge the Guard's dedication on a regular basis. Meanwhile, at Lambert School, Prince George was discovering that his classmates were fascinated by his story about the Royal Guards. During a creative writing assignment, several students asked if they could write stories inspired by George's description of the Guard's daily duties and dedication. Mrs. Patterson had noticed that George's natural leadership qualities were being strengthened by his experience with Morrison. He was more confident in expressing appreciation for others, more aware of the people around him who contributed to his daily life, and more thoughtful about the impact of his words and actions. "Prince George," she said during a private conversation after class, "your story about thanking the Royal Guard has inspired several of your classmates to think about ways they can show appreciation for people in their own lives. You've demonstrated something important about leadership and gratitude." George smiled at the comment, but seemed more interested in the broader implications. "I've been thinking about that too. If recognizing Sergeant Morrison made such a big difference, maybe there are other people at the castle who deserve recognition, but never receive it." This observation revealed the depth of George's growing understanding about leadership and social responsibility. He was beginning to see beyond immediate relationships to consider the broader community of people who contributed to royal life, but remained largely invisible. Back at Windsor Castle, the impact of George's gesture continued to expand in unexpected directions. Kitchen staff, housekeepers, gardeners, and other castle employees had heard about the presentation ceremony and were finding themselves hoping for similar recognition of their own contributions. Mrs. Eleanor Davies, who had been managing the castle's domestic staff for 15 years, mentioned the situation to Catherine, Princess of Wales, during their weekly planning meeting. "Ma'am, there's been quite a bit of discussion among the staff about Prince George's recognition of the Guards. I think many people are feeling inspired by his thoughtfulness." Catherine, who had been equally impressed by her son's initiative, saw an opportunity to expand the gesture into something more comprehensive. "Mrs. Davies, what would you think about establishing regular opportunities for the children to learn about and acknowledge the different roles that keep the castle functioning?" The idea excited Mrs. Davies, who had long believed that the royal children's education should include a thorough understanding of the community of people who supported their daily lives. "I think that would be wonderful, ma'am. It would help the children develop appreciation for all kinds of work, not just the most visible positions." As autumn progressed, these conversations began to coalesce into concrete plans. Prince William and Catherine decided to implement a program that would give George, Charlotte, and Louis regular opportunities to learn about different aspects of castle operations and to express appreciation for the people who made their lives possible. The first of these educational visits was scheduled for the castle kitchens, where head chef Marcus Thompson had been preparing meals for the royal family for 8 years. Chef Thompson was both honored and nervous about the prospect of hosting the royal children in his domain. Prince George approached this visit with the same thoughtful preparation he had brought to his interaction with Morrison. He asked his parents about the chef's background, his responsibilities, the challenges of meal planning for a large household, and the logistics of food preparation for official events. On the morning of the kitchen visit, George surprised his parents by presenting them with a list of questions he wanted to ask Chef Thompson. The questions revealed his growing sophistication in thinking about work, responsibility, and the interconnected nature of the royal household. How do you decide what to cook for state dinners? Was one question. Do you ever get nervous cooking for important guests? Was another. But the question that most impressed his parents was, what would you like people to know about your work that they probably don't understand? The kitchen visit proved to be as meaningful as the interaction with Morrison had been. Chef Thompson, initially intimidated by hosting the young prince, found himself opening up about his passion for cooking, his pride in representing British cuisine to international guests, and his satisfaction in contributing to the royal family's daily life. George listened intently to everything Chef Thompson shared, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest and understanding. When the visit concluded, George asked if he could write a thank-you note to Chef Thompson, acknowledging what he had learned about the complexity and importance of his work. The thank-you note, like the drawing for Morrison, became a treasured possession that Chef Thompson shared with his entire kitchen staff. More importantly, it established a pattern that would continue throughout George's childhood and adolescence, creating a foundation of mutual respect and appreciation that would define his relationship with the royal household staff throughout his life. As word of these visits spread throughout the castle, staff members began to take increased pride in their work, knowing that their contributions were being noticed and valued by the next generation of royals. The simple gesture that had begun with a drawing for Sergeant Morrison was evolving into a comprehensive approach to leadership development that would shape Prince George's character and his future reign in profound ways. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Windsor Castle was becoming a place where service was not just expected but genuinely appreciated, where the distance between royalty and staff was bridged by mutual respect and recognition. Prince George's natural empathy, nurtured and channeled by his parents, was creating a new model for royal relationships that honored both tradition and human dignity. 6 months after Prince George's first gesture towards Sergeant Morrison, Windsor Castle had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. What had begun as a simple act of recognition had evolved into a comprehensive culture of appreciation that touched every aspect of royal household life. The changes were most visible in the daily interactions between the royal family and their staff. Guards no longer maintained the same rigid emotional distance during their duties. While their professionalism remained impeccable, there was a warmth and mutual respect that had previously been absent. Staff members walked with more confidence, spoke with greater pride about their work, and approached their duties with renewed enthusiasm. Prince George, now 11, had become the unofficial ambassador of appreciation within the castle. His regular visits to different departments had become legendary among the staff, not for their formality, but for the genuine curiosity and respect the young prince demonstrated for every type of work. Sergeant Morrison, whose life had been changed by that first drawing, had been promoted to guard captain, replacing the retiring Captain Hayes. The promotion had come with a recommendation from Prince William himself, who cited Morrison's exemplary service and his role in fostering improved relationships between the royal guard and the royal family. On a crisp December morning, exactly 1 year after their first meaningful interaction, Morrison stood at his familiar post near the East Wing entrance. But, this time, his role had expanded beyond security to include mentoring younger guards in what had become known as the Windsor approach to royal service, maintaining professional excellence while embracing the human connections that made their work meaningful. Prince George approached Morrison's post as he had countless times before, but today he carried something special. Over the past year, he had been working on a project that combined his artistic skills with his growing understanding of leadership and service. Captain Morrison, George said, using Morrison's new title with evident pride, "I have something I'd like to show you." Morrison, now comfortable with these interactions while maintaining his professional bearing, turned his attention fully to the young prince. "I would be honored to see it, Your Royal Highness." George opened a leather portfolio and revealed not a single drawing, but an entire book he had created over the past months. The book was titled The Guardians of Windsor, a prince's view of service and dedication. Each page of the book featured a different member of the castle staff, from guards to kitchen workers to gardeners to housekeepers. Every illustration was accompanied by a short description of that person's role, their contributions to royal life, and what George had learned from spending time with them. Morrison's page was the first, featuring an updated version of the original drawing along with a detailed account of how their relationship had developed over the past year. The text read, "Captain Morrison taught me that true service means being present and dedicated even when no one is watching. He showed me that protection comes not just from strength, but from caring about the people you serve. Prince George, Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion, "This is extraordinary. You've created something that honors not just individuals, but the entire concept of service itself." George smiled, pleased by Morrison's reaction, but clearly focused on the broader purpose of his creation. "I wanted to create something that could help other people understand what I've learned this year. Everyone who works at Windsor Castle contributes to something larger than themselves, and I thought their stories deserved to be told." Prince William, who had been watching this exchange from a respectful distance, approached with evident pride in his son's initiative. Over the past year, he had watched George develop from a thoughtful child into a young person with a sophisticated understanding of leadership, responsibility, and human dignity. George has asked if he might present copies of his book to each person featured in it, Prince William explained to Morrison. He's also asked if we might consider sharing it more broadly, as an example of how royal service can be understood and appreciated. Morrison was struck by the implications of what Prince George had created. The book was not just a personal project, but a potential model for how future generations of royals might approach their relationships with the people who serve them. "Captain Morrison," George said, "I was hoping you might help me with something else. I'd like to establish a regular way for my family to recognize and appreciate the work that everyone at Windsor does. Not just special occasions, but ongoing acknowledgement that makes people feel valued for their daily contributions." The request demonstrated how much George had matured over the past year. He was no longer just responding to individual situations, but thinking systematically about how to create lasting positive change in the royal household's culture. Morrison considered the request carefully. "Prince George, what you're describing would require changes to established protocols and traditions that have existed for generations. But I believe your approach represents an evolution of royal leadership that could strengthen rather than diminish the institution." Over the following weeks, George's book project sparked conversations throughout the royal household about recognition, appreciation, and the relationship between service and dignity. Staff members who had spent years working in relative anonymity found themselves feeling valued and respected in ways they had never experienced. The book also caught the attention of other royal households around the world. Princess Catherine had shared stories about George's project with her international colleagues, and several other royal families expressed interest in implementing similar programs to bridge the gap between formal protocol and human connection. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Prince George himself. His year of learning about service, dedication, and appreciation had shaped his character in fundamental ways. He had developed an understanding of leadership that emphasized recognition, respect, and genuine connection with all people, regardless of their position or status. During a private conversation with his father in late December, George reflected on what the year had meant to him. "I used to think being a prince meant people serving me," he said thoughtfully. "But now I understand that it really means me serving them and serving the country. Captain Morrison and everyone else at Windsor have taught me that real leadership means making sure people know their work matters." Prince William was moved by his son's insight. The boy was developing a philosophy of leadership that combined traditional royal values with modern understanding of human dignity and mutual respect. It was exactly the kind of evolution that would serve the monarchy well in the decades to come. As the year ended, Sergeant Morrison's simple morning post at Windsor Castle had become a symbol of transformation. The spot where Prince George had first stopped to express concern about a guard's sore feet had evolved into a place where meaningful relationships between royalty and their staff were nurtured and celebrated. Morrison himself had become something he had never expected when he first joined the Royal Guard: a mentor, a bridge between old traditions and new approaches, and a living example of how individual recognition could transform an entire culture of service. The drawing that George had created over a year ago still hung in the guardhouse, but it was now surrounded by photographs, letters, and mementos from staff members throughout Windsor Castle who had been touched by the young prince's appreciation for their work. On New Year's Eve, as Morrison stood watch over the sleeping castle, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when a 10-year-old boy had stopped to ask about his sore feet. The question had seemed so simple, so innocent, but it had unlocked something powerful in both of them and in the entire royal household. Prince George's subtle action had indeed sparked a big reaction, but not the kind that anyone could have predicted. Instead of disrupting established order, his gesture had strengthened it by adding layers of humanity, respect, and mutual appreciation that made everyone's service more meaningful and fulfilling. As the new year began, Morrison knew that he would carry the lessons of this transformation throughout the rest of his career and his life. Prince George had taught him that true leadership begins with seeing and valuing the people around you, and that the smallest gestures of recognition can create the most profound changes in human relationships. The young prince's journey from a thoughtful child to a compassionate leader was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid through one simple question about a guard's comfort, and one heartfelt drawing expressing gratitude for service. These small acts had proven that authentic leadership starts with authentic caring, and that the future of the monarchy would be strengthened by the human connections that Prince George was learning to build and nurture throughout his life.